Hey everybody, welcome back to another video. Today we're not doing a diecast review, or at least not right now. We got one coming out later, don't you worry. Just did a little sneak peek for you. Ooh. But anyway, tonight we're just talking about, or today, we're just kind of doing a review of the entire NASCAR season. Just kind of a recap of all we saw this year. It was a long season. It was kind of like I said, when I say a long season, doesn't it feel like forever ago that we were, running at Fontana and we were, talking about different things like, will Kevin Harvick finally break his winless spell? We weren't even talking about Truex having a winless spell because he was running so well. We figured, oh, he'll get one. We weren't talking about new winners. We were talking about Trackhouse. Actually, all that much. It wasn't a huge surprise. Larson was winning at Fontana, which surprised nobody because he had just come off a championship. So, picked up right where he left off. And then we go through this whole long season and come to the end. And, just kind of good kind of storybook end, or to end the season and start to open up the pages for 2023. First off, obviously, next gen, what can we say? First year with the numbers forward. I've given it a full season. Honestly, the next gen car looks really great from up top. It looks okay from the side. Not good enough. Sorry. The number is just goofy. The car is not symmetrical. When you look at the car, what we used to do is number. They were all in a straight line. Now it's number. I'm sorry, it's not symmetrical. It doesn't look good. They're going to continue to put the numbers where they are. There's nothing we're going to do to change it at this point. It's set in stone. So it's not like there's any changes coming, but that being said, I will still say it just doesn't look as good. I look right here on this car. The Napa logo could have slid down into this corner. Ashok, Hooters, Lumar could have slid forward into this spot where all those sponsors got removed, the contingencies, and then Iron would have slid right back there. And it might not have fit in the dead center of the door right here. The Napa logo may have, but it would have been right about here. And I can live with that. And that was what everyone was saying last fall, was, hey, we can live with slightly forward. Just inch it forward a little bit. We can live with it. And NASCAR heard that and said, what? We should put them up on the fender? Slam them forward, boys. And that's NASCAR, unfortunately. Go back and look. Look at all the designers that were using, quote-unquote, hashtag slightly forward or something. They were literally putting out all these concepts, and they look great. They all did. They looked really solid. I loved the way they looked. And then NASCAR was like, oh, okay, push it all the way up on the fender. At one point, this Cup Series logo was literally up here. And the 9, or not the 9, but a different number, I think it was a 45, was literally on this front wheel well, and the 5 ended right here. I'm sorry. It was hideous. So, after a full season, I've had enough time to make my decision. The car's ugly. Just still ugly. Like I said, when I say ugly, just paint schemes. I think the car itself, just the shape of the car, looks really good. For instance, look at William Byron's test car. It put the numbers in the middle and it looks just like last year's. That's a good looking race car. And it's just a missed opportunity. That's all that is. So again, that's, close the storybook. We're going to 2023. Nothing's changing. But that's just my final thoughts on that as we've reached a full season of watching. And, after a full season, I love the Xfinity paint schemes more than the Cup schemes, even though, frankly, the talented designers have put more work into these Cup cars. It's just a part of what you have when you move stuff around and, frankly, make it look not as good. Okay, so let's move past that. Let's move on to the car. How did the car perform? Well, to start off the year, I think a lot of us were very pleasantly surprised. We had the first chunk of races at Las Vegas and at Fontana and some places. And we had a few issues that a lot of people were really a little vocal about. Remember, first time that Christopher Bell had a flat tire, he lost 7 laps. 7 laps for a flat tire. And that's where we kind of got on, I got a little ornery at NASCAR because we were like, dude, a flat tire should not end your race. That's ridiculous. Because he had a flat tire, and then because of what, let's see, are they in here? Yeah, these are ride height regulators. These are bump stop things. And when the tires went flat, they would just sit there and drag and be like a beached whale. Nobody could go anywhere. And so with stuff like that, I don't know. They were trying to save the underbodies. I get that, but it created a big problem where once somebody had a flat tire, they were stuck and they couldn't ever get back. And part of the other problem with that was there were no interliners. We learned that very early on. Without these interliners, when a tire let go, these guys whipped around and nailed the wall. There was nothing they could do. A perfect example of that is Kansas. I think I remember Chase was running in the top 10. I was watching him, and I saw him kind of wiggle going to the corner, wiggle, 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 and then the tire let go, and it just whipped around and went straight into the grass. And I knew if that had been a last year car or just a tire with an inner liner, if there were inner liners in that tire, he would have been able to hold on to that car, bring it back to pit road, and we maybe don't even have a caution. And so maybe he ends up way worse off, multi-laps down, whatever. But instead, his race is ended, and it's because he got stuck in the grass because the tire went flat. That wasn't good. So we did get better throughout the season. It seemed like no cars were getting beached at the end of the season. They were starting to figure out how to get these cars back to pit road. So that was a good starting point, that it was like, oh, this is good. I'm glad we're able to, get these cars back around. So that was a problem, and it's been solved. I mean, we haven't talked about that in so long. But, we had our early hiccups with this car. Obviously, we didn't really learn until probably Pocono how bad the safety in terms of rear impacts really was. A lot of guys were saying, hey, these hits are really hard. These are some of the hardest hits. And they kept saying it. And until Kurt Busch got knocked out with a concussion, then we were like, ooh, these things might be a little bad. And then, sure enough, Alex Bowman, Cody Ware, we have more and more people coming forward with bigger, with different issues. And it really, at that point, really, the season started to turn. We were riding some of the highest of highs. Everything was really going really nicely. We had one stinker. Martinsville was just a awful race. I'd argue Sonoma was also really bad. Dennis Hoare's got his win. That was kind of a good storyline, but the racing was absolutely horrifying. I mean, you couldn't pass. Car in the back on fresh tires, and they could only make up like 2 spots over the course of a 40-lap run. That's not good. So, yeah, they have some work to do on the road courses and short tracks as far as getting these cars able to race around each other. But that being said, like I said, we were riding a high. Things were just rolling well, and we kind of worked in, and that's what we, unfortunately, we kind of learned. We went through a good dirt race, ended on, I don't know what the word would be. I know everyone looks back at it, and we see the replay of Briscoe cleaning out Custer. That, to me, is something that, yeah, it's a promotional thing, but that's something that Chase Briscoe should have been, paid back for. I know it wasn't intentional, but you just full-blown wreck the guy at the end of the day. And I as a fan of racing, I don't like to see reckless racing at someone else's expense, and that just can be considered acceptable. But that being said, like I said, we went through a dirt race. We went through Gateway for the first time. Being at that event, let me tell you, Gateway did a heck of a job promoting. They put on such a good race. Now, let me tell you this. The track itself, as far as the facility, it's okay. It's not a top-notch facility. But the effort that was put into that race was second to none. They put a lot of effort into that race to make it good. And they did a great job with what they had. Now, that being said, like I said, it was not a great racetrack. From where I sat, I could not see probably 40% of the racetrack, and I was not far down. I was fairly high up in the grandstand, but because of sponsorship tents and different canopies that were blocking the view, I couldn't see all of the front straightaway till about the start-finish line, a little before that. And then I lost them down to 1 and 2 for other sponsorship tents. And just, that was more on the track. They'll learn, they'll get better, but just that's one thing I had to say is the track did not have the facility for A+, but the effort they put in was A+, and they definitely could deserve to keep getting races. That being said, if that promoter had some reason ever bought Iowa Speedway, that would be the greatest track on the circuit. I will say it multiple times. It would be the best track on the circuit. The racing there is second to maybe Bristol. And the only reason I say maybe is because with this next-gen car, Bristol wasn't all that great compared to what it has been in the past. Where Iowa, I think with the tires wearing like they did, I think Iowa would have still been a really, really fun race. And that's a big miss for NASCAR because I went to that IndyCar race there, and let me tell you, Hy-Vee showed Iowa has a fan base. Iowa has people willing to go watch racing. You just have to bring the product to them. So that's a big miss in terms of the NASCAR side, but, again, going back to Gateway, that's kind of where I got off on the tangent, but going back to Gateway, A+ job on the promotional stuff there. It really felt like NASCAR was the big show in town, and I think we need a lot more of that. And don't overlook the fact that they had a full weekend. They had Friday practice, Saturday qualifying, and the race on Sunday, just like Phoenix, and it felt like a bigger race. They had a longer practice. They had, the guys were there for a hauler parade on Friday morning, Thursday night maybe. And a lot of the sponsors had appearances. I got to see Chase at a Napa. He also was at a Hooters. I want to say Joey was at something. I can't remember. Maybe it was Blaney. Somebody was at a Menards. Somebody was at a Discount Tire. But, the drivers, while getting there Friday, they had time to go do things. They flew in Friday morning, maybe Thursday night, but then Friday, somewhat early in the morning, about 10, 11 o'clock, they were all at appearances. Then they go in and practice, and then they go back and hang out. And, I don't want to take drivers' weekends all the time, but that being said, it does help build the hype for the weekend. So, again, A+ on the promotional job for Gateway, and fingers crossed we can start to see real effort put in by promoters. I'm looking at you, NASCAR. Kansas Speedway puts on good racing, but that facility was a dump when I went there the last time. And I love that track. I don't like saying that about my home. That's been my home track for a long time, and it really doesn't feel good to say that about it, but it was not good. But anyway, so we move past that, get through Gateway. Chastain kind of rises up as this new aggressive driver, and he basically gets to carry that with him all the way to the end of the year. A lot of shenanigans take place at Gateway where he dumps Hamlin, completely junks him, and then on the very next, or maybe second next restart, he just pokes his nose 4 wide, not a malicious thing at all, but just one of those things that an over-aggressive rookie has to learn. And that's kind of where he is. He's kind of that over-aggressive rookie, and those are lessons you got to learn at some point, is that, hey, with 250 laps to go in a race, don't poke your nose 4 wide and spin the guys around you. That's dumb. And, he'll get there. I think as time goes on, he'll get there. But that being said, if these Cup guys don't race him back the same way he's been racing them, he's not going to change. That's what is going to be interesting to see going into next year, is how these guys race him, because he's basically shown he'll spin you, and he doesn't care. He'll go and spin you again. And so how do you race going forward is a question you'll have to ask. Because, like I said, it's not Ross Chastain being mean. It's not him being being a jerk about it. He's just racing. He's racing that hard, and he just gets into people. And as entertaining as it is, it'll be interesting to see that moving forward. So that's kind of a fun story going into 2023. Now that Trackhouse is on the map and he's racing with all these guys up front, how do these guys respond when battling for position on a regular basis? So should be fun to watch going into next year. Then we move into kind of the fall aspect. The Truck Series playoffs started literally in August. I kid you not, August to November was their playoffs. August, September, October, November, 4 months. Their 6 or 8 race playoffs took 4 months. That was way, way too long. And frankly, if I'm being completely honest, as much as I hate the playoff system, I really, really hate it in the lower series. Because look at the Truck Series. There were so many different guys who were good on so many different weeks, which is fun. It's good for racing. It's bad for having a one-race championship. So that's just kind of one of them things that I think was exposed, but the trucks, I got to see them a couple times. They put on pretty solid racing everywhere they went. Couple of instances with Carson Hocevar. He kind of went from the lovable loser to maybe just the loser. A lot of incidents that took place throughout the year. And so that was a good storyline in the Truck Series to follow, because there really wasn't that much else going on. There wasn't a surprise, underdog driver that kind of took off like we've seen in a few years past. So that was a thing that kind of at least kept the Truck Series on the map. You go into Xfinity, you have the rivalries built up between Ty Gibbs, Noah Gragson, and just the field. Just those two are aggressive, and they've kind of got into people multiple times. You got Noah Gragson at Road America, you got Ty Gibbs and Ryan Sieg, Ty Gibbs and Sam Mayer, Noah Gragson and Jeb Burton. There's just a number of different guys they got into, and those little feuds, I kid you not, this was one of the best Xfinity seasons I think we've seen in a long time. The racing was spectacular. The drivers had personality. There was just, man, Xfinity this year was lights out. One of the best Xfinity series, seasons start to finish. AJ just going great on the road courses, yet still racing hard for these wins with guys like Kyle Larson, William Byron, Ty Gibbs and William Byron wrecking out of Watkins Glen to just open the door for Kyle Larson. Just so many great races in Xfinity, so many great stories. Ty Gibbs beating Kyle Larson at the road course in the Xfinity cars, straight up. There's just so many great stories from the Xfinity season. And, at the end of the day, the season came down to to the final race. Two guys at the front were the two best most of the year. Like I said, AJ was definitely one of the best guys, and it was a shame he wasn't there. We'll get into that later, but top-notch Xfinity season. You've got just so many different stories. The 4 in a row for Noah Gragson. You've got the early surge from Ty Gibbs. You've got AJ going and finally getting that super speedway win and then backing up with his 4th straight Roval win. Just so many fun stories. Xfinity, I can't help but say it was a 10 out of 10 season. I may not have liked the way it ended, but that being said, I'm not going to like the way it ended. I looked at the stats, and the stats say about 80% of the time I'm going to be disappointed at the end of the season because the regular season and deserving champion of the series is not going to have a trophy. And, that's something that I just have to learn to live with or watch something else. And so we'll see what that ends up being as time goes on. But, that's just... It was a great season for Xfinity. And then you go into the Cup Series, get into the final half of the year. We had so many different winners. This is where the season for me started to take a turn towards a fun, really great ride down towards more of a I'm not liking this. And that really started, once we got to that 15th winner. Once we got that 15th winner is when I realized, going into the final race, Martin Truex Jr., who was running 4th in points at the time, and Ryan Blaney, who was running 3rd in points at the time, one of them was not going to be in the playoffs. And that's when I really started to have problems with this season, because I think that's a very bad look for the sport, that a guy that has run top 5 all season, he hasn't ended up with a checkered flag. Sometimes it works that way. Racing has a lot of luck involved, and Truex had none of it this year. And yet, his great season where he was running top 5 in points, one of his better seasons. It's one of his good seasons. And, for him to walk home with a 17th place driver points finish and an 18th place car owner points, I think that's just wrong. He lost 10 positions in points due to that, and the payouts and the prestige. I mean, to say he has how many consecutive top 10 points finishes because he's been so consistent. He was consistent. And he got robbed of his results. And I've always hated this format, and that's the win and in thing is a big reason for that, because you cannot convince me at all that Austin Dillon was a more deserving playoff contender than either Ryan Blaney or Martin Truex Jr. I can't get behind it. I just can't. And so you move on from that. Then the end of that week, we have the rain race at Daytona. Gets rained out. Next day, we have a bunch of rain in 1 and 2. Literally trashes almost 30%. No, it's more than 30%. It probably trashed 20 cars. And we wreck a bunch of race cars at Daytona all of a sudden and go under this big rain delay. And during that wreck, you're sitting there thinking, is this really how we're going to set the playoffs? Like a bunch of drivers taken out in wrecks, that's going to be their last shot at the playoffs? And it was for a lot of guys. There were a lot of guys that were in that wreck that had a shot at the playoffs, and their race was ended due to rain. So that was not a good look. And they did end up finishing the race. I don't think it was a very good look, though, when you have 2 RCR cars with one refusing to race the other because of team orders. Tyler Reddick was fine with that. I don't think there's an issue there, but at the end of the day, it's an ugly look. It was really an ugly start to the playoffs, and the playoffs just continued to just stay ugly. I mean, that's the best way to put it. You go into Darlington, and the race was great. Eric Jones gets the win. You had some kind of unpredictability and some good storylines, but because it was the playoffs, Eric Jones' win went overshadowed completely. I mean, the 43 car returned to victory lane in the Southern 500, and it was a story for all of an hour. And then we're talking about Kevin Harvick and Chase Elliott because of playoffs. And you know what? Eric Jones won the Southern 500. The 43 car went back to victory lane in a crown jewel race, and I hate to say it, we practically ignored it. And so that's the first race of the playoffs. Kevin Harvick's car burst into flames because of a flaw in the design of the car. Chase Elliott just wrecks himself there. That was on him. Making mistakes. Kyle Busch blows up while leading. Martin Truex Jr. loses power steering while leading. These are all failures that are just not at the fault of the drivers. And it ends up with kind of a weird finish. And usually you enjoy those finishes. Wow, what a wacky race that took place. And, there was a lot of stories within the race. But unfortunately, a lot of great stories with Eric Jones and some of these guys that finished well were just so overshadowed with playoff implications. Playoffs, that's all they can talk about. And I feel like we got cheated about some very, very fun elements of the season. Everything got so serious in the playoffs, and then we have to talk safety, and it seemed almost too intense that it was just depressing. So you get past that. You moved into Kansas. Bubba Wallace goes out and gets that win. Bubba Wallace gets his first, I don't want to say real win, because the other one counts, but let's be real, guys. He crossed the finish line first and whooped their butt. Whooped the field's butt. And I got to see Bubba win that race, and that was awesome. He got cheered at that Kansas race more than I've heard, especially out of Tennessee. But it was more of a, at that point, there's no more time to boo him. You can't complain about, oh, he just won because of rain. Now he whooped the field. He's got the win. He earned it. He beat them. He beat them all. And that was a great story, but again, same problem. Oh, he's not a playoff guy. So what are we talking about going into next week? We're talking about Kevin Harvick. He got wrecked. We're talking about Tyler Reddick. He got wrecked. We're talking about people on the point bubble. Chase Briscoe, Cindric. We're talking about the point bubble all week. Bubba Wallace won a race, and we ignored it. Same as Eric Jones. And guess what, guys? We're going to ignore it again, because the next week at Bristol, Chris Buescher brings RFK back to victory lane. And what a great story it was. I mean, the racing was not great. But overall, the season, bringing another new winner, RFK returning back to victory lane. Don't get me wrong, that RFK crew with Keselowski, if he doesn't have that flat tire late in that race, he's going to win it. And Fenway Keselowski, that team showed speed at the end of the race. It was a great story to see. But instead, all we can talk about is cut line. And same thing going into the next week. Yes, did he get some attention? Yes, but not near what they deserved. And to me, I just have a problem with that. We talked all about this cut line. About the cut line. Kyle Busch got eliminated for his second blown motor in 3 races. Sorry. I'm never going to buy that was just a coincidence. No way. 2 blown motors in 3 races is crazy. No other Gibbs car blew a motor like all season. Doesn't that seem weird? Anyway, but, those were the storylines. Busch, Harvick, Reddick, these guys were out. And so you go through that section of it, and it was just, we had great storylines going. But unfortunately, we had to hyper-focus on a small section of cars, and it ended up being more negative than positive. And then you move into Texas, and Texas was the ultimate crapshoot. That track and the tires, and that was just a disaster of a race. The playoffs on top only made that worse. When you had guys leading and tires just constantly failing. Chase Elliott wrecks from the lead. Martin Truex wrecks from the lead. I think Kevin Harvick spun from the lead. So many cars wrecked out of the lead due to these tire issues. And it was ugly. It was an ugly look. Alex Bowman gets a concussion from a spin on the early, in the early parts of the race. And Tyler Reddick ends up getting the win. And he's already out of the playoffs at that point. And so guess what? Going into the next week, nobody pays attention to Tyler Reddick either. And that's 4 straight races where guys win that aren't actively in the playoffs, and they get practically ignored the whole week. And instead, we have to basically complain all week about how bad Texas was, because it was that bad. It really was. It was not a great race, but at least you would have had some good storylines. Now you have none because you're ignoring the non-playoff guys. And so Texas goes through. Then we go to Talladega. Talladega actually worked out. Everyone said it was one of the most boring races they'd ever seen. I liked it. I thought Talladega was finally a race where these guys didn't just go junk each other. It was so nice for everyone to be running at the finish and for drivers to have to try to work to the front and not just luck their way there by pushing harder and harder on the last lap. They had to actually really work the traffic and work the lanes to try and slowly move forward. It was much more methodical. And like I said, most of the cars finished the race. That's what I like. I like the fact that, the whole field isn't junked and a bunch of guys aren't hurt. And so Talladega goes by, and I thought that was, for the playoffs, it was a good race. If we didn't have playoffs, I would, maybe, we can have a little more chaos. But due to the playoffs, we're just stuck with what we got. Then we move into the Roval, and we go in there, and, a fairly straightforward race gets flipped on its head when a sign is on the track. Out of the racing groove, there's a stupid sign that fell off the wall, and they throw that yellow, and the entire race flips on its head. Suddenly, Kyle Larson's out. Christopher Bell storms from the back on new tires and goes in. Chase Elliott gets dumped, and it's just, that's unfortunately what we have now. An entire race manipulated by a stupid plastic sign. And, I go out of that race, and yeah, the storyline's Christopher Bell and winning in that, but I think a lot of people are still focused on that sign. We're sitting there like, dude, did a sign just change the outcome of the entire season? And it did. Kyle Larson didn't make the Final Four. Christopher Bell did. That sign was the difference there. That plastic sign changed a lot of things. And so that one was hard to enjoy. You move on to Las Vegas, and we have a straightforward Cup race. And I didn't talk about it, but in the Xfinity race there at Las Vegas, we have a phantom caution. Brandon Jones gets loose in a corner, and they just throw a yellow, and he's not even smoking. He was just slightly loose. And that caution comes out, they pit, everyone gets tires, and guess what happens on the restart? Josh Berry ends up getting out in front. Noah Gragson goes to the back. Noah's trying to win at his home track. I know that really sucked for him. He wasn't happy. He was out front by 7 seconds before that. But A.J. Allmendinger ends up with a loose wheel. He loses a lap. He loses 15, 25 spots. I don't remember how many. I think he lost at least 15 spots. But that ended A.J. Allmendinger's season. A.J. wasn't able to recover and get into the final round, and that was due to a phantom caution. So that's a black eye. And then, we move on to the second race in the round of 8. That was at Homestead, and Homestead put on great racing both days. Great racing both days. It was really the best weekend we had in the playoffs was Homestead. It just seemed like there was no downside. There was a lot of upside. There wasn't really a bunch of garbage happening that just ticks people off. It seemed like Homestead just was really a good, straightforward race, put on a good show. Kyle Larson did dominate, but it seemed like the racing was pretty good, watching these guys on the very edge of control, and it was frankly our best race of the playoffs. Then we move into Martinsville, and we have the dump and win from Ty Gibbs, and that was, say what you want, there was a lot of intensity behind it, but it was a sour look for the sport in a way. And let's be completely honest here, if that's not for the playoffs, I think we all look at it a little differently. Still bad, but we look at it differently. But because of the playoffs, it was full-blown, it's unacceptable. And at the end of the day, hey, it's a trophy, I still don't like the move, but, I don't like the idea that guys are in the playoffs, you have to race them totally different. And then you go to the Cup Series race at Martinsville, and you have the wall ride. And the wall ride captures the internet by storm. And the wall ride just gets, there was so much attention on NASCAR for a whole week leading up into the championship race. All this attention from the craziest move we've all ever seen. 2.5 seconds he gained on the racetrack, all the way from 10th to 5th to get into the final championship race. And unfortunately, it cements the playoffs as something that we will see forevermore. And that's unfortunate because, yeah, we wouldn't have had that move without the playoffs. But that being said, the move was spectacular. And it's really just a bummer that, unfortunately the side effect is going to be we're never going to get rid of the playoffs. And I hate the poor playoffs. It's a race, not a play. You don't play racing, you race. But anyway, so anyway, we go through that. And all the hype builds for this championship race at Phoenix. And then the Phoenix races happen. And they were just sort of duds. The truck race wasn't all that full of action. We did have a bunch of late race restarts and cautions, which I've never been a fan of, those crazy restarts and finishes. Now, luckily, the guy that had the best truck all season was able to get back to the front and win the race, Zane Smith. But I'm telling you, if Ben Rhodes had won that championship, I don't know how I would have felt, because I just hate to see deserving drivers walk home from their season with nothing, even though they've run as well as they have. And that's, I think, a thing that really, really bugs me. Going through Saturday, Ty Gibbs had a good season, don't get me wrong, but he did not have the same season as A.J. Allmendinger or Noah Gragson. And A.J. doesn't even get a top 4 points finish, and Noah walks home without a trophy. And between both of them, it just sucks to watch all season long and know, it's those two. Those two are duking it out. Maybe there is a third guy, and there's the big three. And instead, we all just have to say, when we get to that final race, we'll see. And I'm not going to lie, the final race was kind of a dud. For as good as Xfinity puts on a show, that was the one race that wasn't all that great. It wasn't terrible. Actually, the racing was pretty solid. But because it was a championship race, it just changed how people were racing around each other. And then you go to the Cup race on Sunday, and, it's classic Phoenix. It's a dull race. That's what Phoenix unfortunately puts on. They're fairly straightforward, luckily, but at the end of the day, it really wasn't close. I mean, yeah, Chastain was kind of close, but at no point was there really any battles for the championship. And, like I said, I hate the format already, so you don't have to make me hate it more by doing that. So, like I said, the season it started out with such a bang and so much momentum behind it, and just sputtered and sputtered to a stop at the end and just grinded to a halt. And, I do have high hopes for 2023, but I do also have this kind of hopeless look into 2023 as well, of like, well, no matter what happens, these playoffs are here to stay. And for the rest of my time as a fan, I'm going to have to go back and remember these seasons for different reasons than who got the championship. And that's something I just don't like. I watch the IndyCar season and Will Power's a champion, and that's it. Will Power's a champion. That's all you say. Nobody says who was the deserving champion. It was Will Power, because we all know it. Who was the best driver all year? Will Power, because he won it. There is no question. We have those questions in NASCAR, because when you gimmick up the point system and reset points all the time, not just reset the points once, you reset the points constantly. And when you're constantly resetting the points, it's hard to take it seriously. And the drivers have gotten to that point. They still want to win the title, don't get me wrong. They want that championship. But they value race wins over, they value a multitude of race wins over the championship now. And that is not a good sign. That is a sport that is not being taken seriously by its own competitors. That's a problem. So moving forward, like I said, little hopefulness though too. They can fix that short track package. Sounds like they might be interested in putting some horsepower back in these cars. Love the sound of that. Absolutely love the sound of that. Putting some horsepower back in these things on short tracks, road courses, cutting down the downforce, just making it so these things are just a handful to drive and a lot of talent involved trying to keep them on the track. So really excited for some of those changes, but also a little disappointed knowing there are some changes that we're just never going to see. So that's kind of a bookend on the 2022 season. Let me know what you think of the 2022 season, what your emotions are heading off into 2023, and what you're excited for moving into next year. There's some new things taking place. There's a street race and some things like that. So whether you're excited or not for it, I guess. But let me know in the comments what your thoughts going into next year are. I know I'm excited. I'm fingers crossed going to be at my first Daytona 500 next spring. So very excited for that potential opportunity. We'll see where we end up here. But other than that, guys, thanks for watching. I hope you guys have enjoyed this NASCAR season and all the streams and stuff that have gone along with it. And stay tuned to the channel. We'll have some Sunday specials and things like that taking place in the off season, and a few different new arrival streams. But otherwise, we'll kick back up next year. Not for Daytona, but we'll kick back up next year for the second race. I think it's Fontana. But we'll kick back in Fontana with those streams again. So thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you next year.